Have you ever asked yourself who really owns and controls Kenya? Is it the families that accumulated large pieces of land during colonial rule? Or is it the financial system that determines who gets credit, who is locked out, and who survives economic shocks? Some people argue that power sits with political dynasties, those whose names repeat across decades of leadership. Others point to foreign corporations, lenders, and institutions whose money quietly shapes national decisions. So, who does Kenya actually owe, and what does that debt buy in influence? And who controls the land, from enormous private estates to leased farms held by multinationals? Or maybe power is spread across banks, pension funds, corporations, or governments beyond our borders? These questions lead down a deep rabbit hole. In this video, I will explain who is actually pulling the strings in Kenya. By the end, you will understand who actually owns and controls Kenya, or rather, who controls the system and how that system actually works. Let's get into it. Let me start with a simple question. If you want to control Kenya or any country, what is the first thing you will go for? You guessed right. Land. So, to begin with, the first category of the people who control this country are landowners. Not just owning land, but huge chunks of it. In Kenya, land is not just soil. It is history, wealth, and power. And ownership is deeply unequal. Less than 2% of Kenyans own more than half of all arable land. That is about 54% of arable land. What that means is that the 2% of Kenyans, apart from just controlling land, they control food supply in the country. The remaining 46% of arable land is divided among the 98% of Kenyans, people who own tiny parcels averaging under 3 acres each. Meanwhile, the wealthiest 0.1% each hold huge tracts of land, averaging around 200 hectares per person. Some families and individuals have large parcels of land. The Kenyatta family, for example, controls extensive agricultural estates, tea plantations, ranches, sisal farms, and more. They own over 500,000 acres. To give it context, the Kenyattas alone have land 3 times the size of Nairobi County. That makes them the country's largest private landholders. Across Kenya's countryside, other prized arable regions sit largely in elite hands. This concentration drives land speculation and can leave productive land idle rather than feeding local communities. That means all of us depend on the elites for food. If they stop producing food on their large tracts of arable land, millions of families will automatically face food insecurity. The third group that owns large tracts of land is foreign corporations. Foreign companies hold large pieces of land for commercial agriculture, especially in horticulture and tea estates. Their ownership of these lands often have roots in colonial era laws and subsequent post-independence leases, which have sometimes sparked conflicts with local farmers. So, generally, Kenya's powerful families, together with other elites and foreign corporations, are the ones who owns this country as far as land is concerned. Kenya's land ownership is a mix of inherited privilege, political connections, colonial history, and corporate control, with most of the physical land base controlled by a tiny segment of Kenyans. Now, assuming you want to join these people in running Kenya, what do you need? Money, a lot of it, so that you can buy large tracts of land, enough to join their league. The question is, who controls money in Kenya? The Central Bank of Kenya is the cornerstone of the monetary system. It is responsible for issuing currency, managing inflation, and regulating banks. Importantly, the CBK is 100% state-owned, and its governor operates independently of direct political appointment by the presidency. Kenya's banking sector is a major player in credit creation and the domestic flow of money. But unlike the US, where a few global asset managers dominate stock market votes, in Kenya, ownership of financial institutions is more dispersed, varying by bank, pension fund, cooperative, and individual investor. For example, Cooperative Bank of Kenya stock is majority owned by cooperative societies through Coop Holdings, while the rest trades among smaller institutions and public investors. Banks and pension funds also dominate domestic public debt holdings. Banking institutions account for roughly 45% of government securities, with pension funds holding about 29%. When Kenya issues treasury bonds and bills to finance government spending, much of that debt is held internally by these financial institutions and funds, meaning that domestic investors are deeply tied to the country's fiscal health. External creditors also matter. Multilateral institutions like the World Bank and China are among the largest external holders of Kenya's external debt. So, what we see here is that despite families like the Kenyattas owning banking institutions, no single person, institution, or family owns or controls Kenya's money. Kenya's monetary and credit system is governed by a mix of state institutions, banks, pension funds, and international lenders, each with influence over how money flows and who gets credit. Beyond land and banks, corporations are another axis of influence. Kenya's most powerful companies, listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange and operating across sectors like telecoms, insurance, agriculture, and retail, have diverse ownership structures. Take Safaricom for instance, Kenya's most valuable company. Early this year, the government sold part of its stake, reducing its share to about 20%. This move saw South Africa's Vodacom increase its holding to 55%. The rest of Safaricom shares are publicly traded. Insurance giant Jubilee Holdings Limited shows how institutional and international investment matters. Its largest shareholder historically has been the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, with other stakes held by institutional investors and public shareholders. Other listed firms have varied ownership. For instance, Unga Group's largest shareholder belongs to a local investment company, while Scan Group's controlling stake is held by a multinational parent company outside Kenya. Unlike markets dominated by a handful of global asset managers, shareholding at the NSE tends to be more fragmented, with families, institutional investors, employee groups, and foreign strategic partners all taking parts. However, the power to influence board decisions and corporate strategy still lies with those holding the largest blocks of equity, be it the government, foreign multinationals, or institutional holdings. This means that corporate influence in Kenya is not controlled by a tiny group of people like in the US, but rather by a mix of public, private, and international stakeholders, each playing different roles in shaping the economy. Now let's address the giant in the room: debt. Debt is a form of control, especially for countries like Kenya with large financing needs. As of early 2026, Kenya's public debt had crossed 11 trillion shillings, encompassing both domestic and external borrowing. A large portion of this, roughly 55%, is domestic debt, funded by treasury bonds and bills sold to local banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and other investors. Recent reports show that banking institutions hold about 45% of domestic government securities, while pension funds hold around 29% of that debt. This internal structure means that much of the money the government owes is owed to Kenyan financial institutions and institutional investors. This means that the health of our financial system is pegged to the health of those institutions. External debt, including loans and bonds held by multilateral institutions such as the World Bank's International Development Association, commercial creditors, and governments including China, also makes up a significant portion of Kenya's total debt portfolio. When it comes to debt, who holds these debts matters. This is because foreign creditors can influence negotiations, repayment terms, and infrastructure financing. On the other hand, domestic holders influence policy debates on taxation, spending, and interest rates. But because debt is divided among many players, not just a couple of mega institutions, no single entity owns Kenya's debt outright. So, while debt shapes Kenya's economic options, the web of holders, local banks, pension funds, multilateral lenders, and foreign bond holders means control is distributed across institutions with very different priorities and constraints. Now, let's step back and look at the full picture. The answer to the question of who owns Kenya does not sit in one place. Land is concentrated in the hands of a few powerful families, elites, and foreign corporations. Money flows through state institutions, banks, pension funds, and international lenders. Major companies are shaped by a mix of government stakes, foreign multinationals, institutional investors, and local shareholders. On the other hand, debt ties our country's future to both domestic financial institutions and global creditors. As it stands, there is no single person, family, or group that owns Kenya outright. Control is spread across systems, land ownership, financial power, corporate influence, and debt obligations, all reinforcing each other in subtle ways. Each system limits and enables others.